Good morning.
Good morning.
O thou great source of life, who some call God and others find too large to name it all, we join with the earth and with each other to recreate the human community. Over and over, learning the value of love, may we give it frequently and with the strength of loyalty. May we remain loyal to those who we love. So may we, different as we are, find ourselves to be part of one great living mystery. For blessed is the one within the many, and blessed are many who are one. Our morning's hymn is number 18, an oldie but goodie.
Good morning, and welcome to Fountain Street Church. Our vision statement says, we strive to be a vibrant church community that challenges individuals to craft their own spiritual journeys and to engage in creative and responsive action in the world. My name is Kooistra, and I serve as the governing board liaison to the Religious Services Committee. Today, we welcome Timothy Chester as our speaker. Tim has been a member of Fountain Street since 1988 and has served in many capacities, including as a member of the governing board and a member of the interim search committee. It's an honor to have you part of the service today, Tim. And a special welcome and thanks to our two guest musicians, Robert Byrons, who is in attendance most Sundays in the sanctuary. Thank you for today. And to Dale Schreimer, instructor at Grand Valley, and I have even used his services on occasion. So thank you for being here, Dale. Next week, our speaker will be Beverly Drake. Beverly serves as preacher steward and chair of the steward board at the St. Luke's AME Zion Church in Grand Rapids. I have known Beverly for over 40 years, and I know she will bring us a meaningful message.
Please join me in the responsive reading, which is printed in your order of service. And if you'd prefer to read it in the hymnal, it's number 576. If recognizing the interdependence of life, we strive to build community, the strength we gather will be our salvation. If you are black and I am white, it will not matter. If you are female and I am male, it will not matter. If you are older and I am younger, it will not matter. If you are progressive and I am conservative, it will not matter. If you are straight and I am gay, it will not matter. If you are Christian and I am Jewish, it will not matter. If we join spirits as brothers and sisters, the pain of our aloneness will be lessened, and that does matter. In the Spirit, we build community and move toward restoration.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living a life in peace. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine there's no countries. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one.
For our prayer this morning, Tim has selected the words of Harry Meserve, and they are as follows. From arrogance, pompousness, and from thinking ourselves more important than we are, may some saving sense of humor liberate us. For allowing ourselves to ridicule the faith of others, may we be forgiven. For making war and calling it peace, special privilege, calling it justice, indifference and calling it tolerance, pollution and calling it progress, may we be cured. From telling ourselves and others that evil is inevitable while good is impossible, may we stand corrected. God of our mixed up, tragic, aspiring, doubting, and insurgent lives, help us to be as good as in our hearts we have always wanted to be. Let us join together in a moment of silence. Let it be. The offering is the sacrament of the free church. It is supported by the voluntary generosity of all who join with us. The offering will now be taken and given and received in grateful appreciation for our shared hopes and values.
think it was around 18 years ago that Kirsten Lundeen, Kirsten, I know you're here this morning, right there. Kirsten Lundeen and I were elected to co-chair an interim minister search committee to help Fountain Street Church tide itself over in our search for our current senior minister. And we had a great time doing it. We looked at powerful ministers from California to New England, and we found a good candidate in Hartford, the Reverend Dr. Judith Walker Riggs, who some of you may remember. She was astonishing in many ways, a powerful sermon giver, swore like a sailor when she had to, and had an excellent sense of humor. This is something that she wrote back in 1989, and it is quoted in the book Our Chosen Faith, which was written by, gathered together by John Burens and F. Forrester Church for Beacon Press in Boston. And I think I selected it as a reading because it sums up the turmoil in which many of us find ourselves on a daily basis, wondering what's up, what's down, what's right, what's wrong, what's true, and what is false. So you have to imagine Judith bellowing this out. Long ago, it seemed so simple. The universe was a 3-storied apartment house with heaven on the top floor, full of saints and stars and other cool things, earth in the middle, full of people, animals, and plants, and hell in the basement, full of terrible and scary things. From his vantage point up in the attic, God had nothing else to do but sit up there watching us. We were the center of attention. We were his people. Then came Copernicus. He said that the sun did not move around the earth at all, but was a fixed star. He said it was the earth and us on it that did the moving, and worse, that the earth was just one of the planets that so moved, one among many, and not the center of anything at all. In the last few decades, we have been entering a new vision of the universe as radical and revolutionary as the Copernican changeover, and we have still not worked out what it all means, either in theology or in our view of what humanity is and what we ought to do with our lives.
He's got the whole world in his hands. 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 He's got the wind and the rain in his hands. He's got the wind and the rain in his hands. He's got the sun and the moon in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the little bitsy baby in his hands. He's got the pretty little baby in his hands. He's got that itsy bitsy baby in
Thank you, Dale and Robert, for enlivening and inspiring us this morning. And that's my little granddaughter back there. The itsy bitsy baby, Layla, who is 13 months. I'm glad you could come. Many years ago, I lived in New Orleans, where I was a member of the First Presbyterian Church. And as with so many things in New Orleans, everything there is molded, transformed, and eventually modified beyond recognition by that city's unique culture. And so it was with the Presbyterians, a congregation that had drifted significantly from its Calvinist roots. What were we exactly? Well, not Catholic, that's for sure. When I reminded my landlady, an elder in that church, that she was indeed a Calvinist, she objected vehemently, shocked that I would say such a nasty thing about her out loud. Nonetheless, my fellow congregants forged their own intense spiritual request, one path of which was a sporadically offered and attended adult Sunday school study class that sought to mine the writings of the theologian Paul Tillich for wisdom. A professor at Harvard University's Divinity School and arguably one of the most consequential theologians of the last century, Tillich was in his heyday in the 1940s and 50s. His philosophically dense text requires a machete to plow through. He even had an impact at this church, and in 1957 debated Dr. Duncan Littlefair on the subject of orthodoxy, neo-orthodoxy, and naturalism. And I suspect that they were probably in agreement with each other. My so-called Bible class in New Orleans got through about one page of Tillich's text per week, and it seemed like we were eternally stuck in his 1963 book, Morality and Beyond. Born in 1886, Tillich's life spanned nearly a century, witnessing immense technological and political upheaval. Terms for God like ground of being, the eternal now, and being itself earned him the title of atheist and heretic by most Christian fundamentalists. I was young, 25, and trying to make sense of life while living in New Orleans, quite a dichotomy. But mining Tillich made sense at the time, on top of all the other fun that I was having. I remember good fellowship, laughter, and excellent arguments as we sought to make sense of his non-literalist interpretation of the Bible. One of his lines caught my mind, however, and has stuck with me to this day as a mantra or guide to living right and well. Thus, the title of my sermon. The moral imperative is the command to become what one potentially is, a person within a community of persons. And I'm going to repeat that because I'm going to hone in on it today. And so just think about the complexity behind it. The moral imperative, he doesn't say from whom this stems, is the command to become what one potentially is, a person within a community of persons. I can remember us arguing about what this meant and who was commanding and why. And I seem to remember that we later caught up with one of Tillich's related thoughts, and we altered this sentence to better read, to become a whole person within a community of persons. To me, the charge was dual. You need to tend to your own spiritual garden so that you can fully and joyfully grow and participate in community. And at the same time, community nourishes and waters that personal garden. Everyone wins. And so I thought to myself, There's your sermon title, Tim. I've been carrying that around with me for years. Carol Kooistra twisted my arm and talked me into doing this, and of course, you agree back in April, and then come late July, you really start worrying. But here it is, and here we are. I took my remembered Tillich phrase to Don Lubbers, President Emeritus of Grand Valley State University and a longtime member and leader of this congregation, seeking his advice on whether it was, to his mind, something I can work with. And I see Don and Nancy are sitting here wondering if I can actually pull this off. Thanks, Don, for the support. Along with his encouragement, he quickly pointed out how timely a topic was the religious mandate of living within the context of community, especially in the midst of these overly self-focused days of social upheaval. Here then is an opportunity to test the value of Tillich's admonition. Who would have ever thought that we would be hearing and seeing the astonishing phrases, actions, and tweets that are roaring out of the mouths of public officials these days? Think back to Judith Walker Riggs' words when she summarized the change in our technological understanding of the universe and saying that our changes were so radical and revolutionary that we still have not worked out what it all means, either in theology or in our view of what humanity is and what we ought to do with our lives. And she wrote that in 1989, which is a significant chunk of time ago. And one might argue that things have not improved since the time she wrote that. For many people of our generation, the inherited spiritual and intellectual home of our parents, their ways of thinking, believing, and worshiping have been buffeted, if not destroyed, in our times. The quantum leaps in our scientific and technological knowledge have so far outstripped our emotional capacity to absorb the implications for our humanity. The old truths and assurances by which we were once taught to distinguish right and wrong, justice and injustice, goodness and evil have clouded over. Truth has been abandoned for falsehoods, and lies are told openly without regard for the consequences of doing so. We live most of our days, says the Unitarian Universalist poet May Sarton, in strained relationship with our past, empowered by our experience, not empowered by our experience, but rather hampered by old limitations and old versions of ourselves. I've been privileged to participate in the summer sermons at Fountain Street Church several times over the years. And twice before, I've chosen to meditate on the benefits of solitude as a spiritual practice. Experiencing solitude, I believe, helps to solidify the soul, and to paraphrase Tillich, aids in making us into a whole person. John Donne, the 17th century dean of London's St. Paul's Cathedral, uses the metaphor of islands in his devotional writing as thinking of them as people in solitude, acknowledging that although the islands appear to be separate from one another and the mainland, their connection to land beneath the water are alike to our inevitable and necessary link back to that which is whole. Acknowledging the geographical reality of islands, he is quoted as saying, and I might add very inaccurately, as no man is an island unto himself. That is not the quote. The actual phrase is, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away to the sea, Europe is less. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved with mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Allow me to share another May Sarton quote with you, this one taken from one of her essays. I first saw this printed in the Fountain Street Church Chimes back in 1991. I believe it was a favorite quote of Bruce Bodie, who was a minister here then. And I clipped it and stuck it to my refrigerator until it curled from age. I read it at my mother's memorial service. As an adopted child, I have found it to be one of the most sustaining observations I've ever encountered. Many people feel orphaned. We are all, sooner or later, orphans, and in many cases, unfairly punished by life. Like me, they search frantically for shelter from falling into emptiness. But we all finally have to come to see that only when we have learned to mother ourselves and shelter ourselves are we truly ready for communion with others on any level. But does it take a community to help you become a whole person? Or as Sarton suggests, is it an individual struggle, a one-way street? Being a whole person, is that the same thing exactly as getting your act together? Or knowing thyself? Socrates was famous for arguing that to be wise, one must know oneself. To thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night, the day, thou canst not then be false to any man, is the fatherly advice given to Polonius in Shakespeare's play Hamlet. But is this as lofty as it seems? A way of saying that nothing matters more to how we should act than our own self-esteem? A sort of mantra, I just really need to focus on me right now. It's a universal excuse, a get-out-of-jail-free card from the prison of having to consider and acknowledge your own failings and biases and whims. I don't have to conform to the world. It has to conform to me. But maybe the opposite is true. My life nemesis, theologian John Calvin, from whom I cannot escape, try as I do, underscored the absolute necessity of accurate knowledge to knowing God. Read Becoming a Whole Person. He does this in the opening pages of his monumental work, Institutes of Christian Religion. He wrote, nearly all wisdom we possess, that is to say, true and sound wisdom, consists in two parts: the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves. Calvin argued that one could not truly know God without knowing oneself, and that one couldn't truly know oneself without knowing God. And Calvin acknowledged the obvious dilemma, saying, which one precedes and brings forth the other is not easy to discern. We can begin to get at whether wholeness precedes community or whether genuine community stems from whole persons forming community. Clearly, we can understand this paradox best when we examine instances of when it's not working so well, such as right now. In our present time, we need look no further than American society and politics. Back in 2000, and it seems astonishing that this book is now 18 years old, Robert Putnam published his landmark book, Bowling Alone, taking his title to illustrate why the decline in Americans' membership in social organizations is problematic for our democracy. Putnam uses bowling, the sport of bowling, as an example. Although the number of people who bowl has increased in the last 20 years, the number of people who bowl in leagues has decreased. If people bowl alone, which seems to be the trend, astonishingly, they do not participate in social interaction and civic discussions that might occur in a league environment. Putnam surveyed the decline of social capital in the United States in his book, dating it back to 1950. He has described the reduction in all forms of in-person social intercourse upon which Americans used to found, educate, and enrich the fabric of our social lives. He argues that this undermines active civic engagement, which a strong democracy requires of its citizens. Putnam discusses ways in which Americans have disengaged from political involvement, including decreased voter turnout, public meeting attendance, serving on committees, and working with political parties, and, yes, attending church. Putnam also cites Americans' growing distrust in their government. So a timely sermon, this, considering voting is a civic duty that we should be engaged in this coming Tuesday. We are seeing this same trend of disengagement at work. Excuse me. We are seeing this same trend of disengagement at work in our current political climate, where a central classic Christian religious theme is increasingly absent, the theme of the common good, which runs counter to the current rhetoric elevating radical individualism and minimal government. Our upcoming elections may end up being a referendum on two competing visions of what community means in the United States and how it is valued. In the one vision, government's role in helping meet the needs of the most disadvantaged should be minimal, if not completely non-existent. Individuals are expected to make it on their own, and they should not be subject to any limitations on their right to be free from any socially imposed obligations to help those who have not made it. In the other competing vision, one that is not nearly as well articulated, I think, society is a community of persons who do have moral obligations to care for the good of the whole, and not just the economic advancement of individual persons with the means to become wealthy and successful. The irony here is that the former philosophy is being given a quick paint job that would imply that it is in sync with American religious values, whereas the heart of the doctrine is really at odds with traditional Christian values that give a moral priority to the common good over the private. Why is it that supposedly Christian candidates are fleeing from one of the enduring moral imperatives of the Judeo-Christian faith? Could it be, as our society is fragmenting and social capital is diminished in favor of expressions of individual experience, so are we increasingly lacking in politicians who are truly whole persons, dedicated to a society and a government for and by the people. Let it be our prayer that we each strive to be whole persons, endeavoring to, in love, unite to become a whole community. In the words of this morning's invocation, for blessed is the one within the many, and blessed are the many who are one. Amen. I ask you to join me in singing hymn number 122, Sound Over All Waters. And again, it's my hope that the tune, if not the words, will be familiar to you.
After the benediction, we invite you to remain in your seats while listening to the postlude. If you select to leave during the postlude, please leave the chapel quietly so that others can listen to the postlude. Thank you. And Tim has requested this as the benediction. May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest so that we may give ourselves to the work of our world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we move.